G'day, welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to talk about barrel twist, and what we're talking about is the twist in the rifling, imparting stability to your projectile. The quick nutshell there is you've got twist inside your barrel. That twist is measured. It's either written on the barrel, you buy it as knowing what it is, you measure it by pushing something down and counting how many times it rotates. But simply put, that number, be it 1 in 6 or 1 in 8 or 1 in 10 or 1 in 12 or 1 in 14, is the twist. The other bit that you should understand, most people do, but some people still get this wrong, is the smaller the number, the faster the twist. And that is because 1 in 6 means you get 1 rotation in 6 inches. 1 in 12 means you get 1 rotation in 12 inches. So as you can see, the 1 in 6, it's going to have rotated twice over 12 inches. So very simply, the smaller the number is the faster the twist. That's in there. That's for making the projectile, the bullet, stable. A bullet wouldn't naturally fly through the air like an arrow. It doesn't have anything to create its stability. So to create stability, we get it spinning, which creates a gyroscopic stability, and that's what the bullet uses. And then in a simple nutshell, the longer the bullet is, the more stability it needs, or the more spin it needs, the more RPM, more revs per minute it needs. So the faster it needs to be spinning. And that's the longer the bullet. Generally, what we're talking about is weight. A heavier bullet needs more spin. But I suppose that's the very quick nutshell. There's other videos on explaining more details of the physics and science of that. And for this situation, I don't want to get too much into the physics and science. I want to explain more in general terms as to how you should consider or work out what you need in the way of twist for the projectiles, or what projectiles you can run in your barrel, those sorts of things. There is, for those people who want to know properly, then in ballistic calculators, in stability calculators, in a lot of the manufacturers, be that Berger or Sierra or Hornady or Applied Ballistics or whatever. There's lots of ways to calculate your stability factors. There's ways to make suggested of barrel, the likes of, here's some Berger bullets. They say on the box, they say this is 1 in 10. This is a 220 grain projectile for a 30 cal, and it needs a minimum of a 1 in 10 twist. That's the minimum twist you'll get away with it, which means that it's that or a lower number. So 1 in 10, 1 in 9, 1 in 8. A 1 in 11 would be too slow a twist, not enough twist to stabilize these projectiles. So those are the ways you find out what it is. But like I said, the layman's terms, what do we actually got to understand about it? There's a couple of factors involved. One, you've got the amount of twist, so how fast you're twisting your barrel. But what we're actually after is the speed, or is the spin, is the RPM. Revs per minute of the bullet is what is actually creating this. So that is one part of it, the amount of twist, or how fast a twist you've got in your barrel. The other factor, and the bit that I'm really doing the video about, is the speed of the projectile. If you've got a 30 cal projectile, these ones here, these are ones that are a good one to talk about. These are 1 in 10 twist. But that is because they are really factoring these projectiles to go into, probably the least they're going to work in would be a 308. And that's a 308 Winchester. But they'll also run in a 300 Norma, or a the 300 378 Weatherby Magnum. They'll also run, these bullets will also, or these projectiles will also work in a 300 Blackout. Now there's where I've just changed things around monstrously. And the reason for that, when I go to something like a 300 Blackout, this sort of projectile is not probably very common to use there, but you can get it down to where it's running subsonic. That's what the Blackout's all about. Run it suppressed, get down to subsonic, it's super quiet, a lot of energy because it's a decent sized projectile. And like I said, you can go right up to, let's go sort of the top of the factory things, the 30378 Weatherby Magnum, big mouthful. So the 300 Norma, that sort of stuff, 300 Rum, they can run this same projectile. In those big ones, that round is going to be running over 3,400 feet per second. Now the difference that I want to talk about here is that The 1 in 10 twist is probably a little too fast almost when you're spinning it up, when you've got the projectile traveling at 3,400 feet per second. You're probably moving into, and I haven't done the maths on it, getting into the mid and higher 200,000 RPM are how fast the projectile is going to be running in those ones that have that sort of speed. But you wouldn't be able to stabilize it in the blackout. Running at 1,000 feet per second, these things are not going to be spinning fast enough to stabilize. So in the 300 blackout, you probably actually need something more like a 1 in 5 twist or a 1 in 4.5 twist or something like that to stabilize a big projectile like this. So what I'm actually trying to say is that that's obviously extreme ends of the pie we're talking about there. Most of these numbers, when you see just in the proper calculators, it'll work out for you, but where you're just looking at something like this 1 in 10 twist, that is for an average speed. And an average speed is going to be in the high 2000s, in the 2600, 2700, 2800, 3000 is where that average speed is. So, to now come back out of being complicated, if you keep in mind that that's what it is, it's an average speed, and then you can go with, let's say you do want to run as light a projectile as this in your 300 Norma, then you find that 1 in 10 will get away with it, but you might even see in my way of looking at things and what I've done for my stuff, I would tend to, if I was specifically setting that up, I would tend to slow that twist down a little bit. I would tend to go to probably a 1 in 11, maybe even a 1 in 12 if I was really planning on holding that 3,500 RPM, or 3,500 feet per second, if I was going to do that all the time. Not something I normally would. I'd go with a heavier projectile in that round, but that's what I would consider there. And like I said, in something like the 300 blackout or the slower, once you're coming down below the 2,000 feet per second and going down into like I said, the 1,000 feet per second, then you've definitely got to speed that spin up. You've got to speed that twist up so that you can get with those two things, the barrel twist and the bullet speed, you can get the RPM you need to stabilize the bullet. So another thing I want to say to people, some people get confused about extreme long range shooting, and the bullet's going down to subsonic and it's getting down to 1,000 feet per second or 800 feet per second. So then they say, well, you'd need more twist for that, need more spin for that. No. Once you start a projectile spinning, it will stay spinning. So if it leaves the muzzle at 3,000 feet per second, and then that projectile's got, let's say, 200,000 or 180,000 RPM, that 180,000 RPM would probably take 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes to actually stop spinning. The bullet will slow down in its forward motion, the spinning will stay the same. It just hasn't had the time. There's too much inertia going on. It has not slowed down a noticeable or an appreciable amount at all. So yes, once it started spinning there, then it's still stable at 800 feet per second because it still has the 200,000 RPM on it. So that's getting a little confusing, but what I'm saying is don't worry about it. It's about your muzzle velocity. That's where this is all done. So the last bits I want to go into about your twist and your spin and what we're talking about is, as I just sort of alluded to, with the ELR stuff and specifically to jacketed projectiles, I would tend to go a little bit slower. I'll tend to go, I don't focus on a stability factor. I stay in the ballpark of where things should be okay, but I would tend to go a little bit slower. So if it's recommended to be 1 in 9 for the projectile I'm using, but that's an average recommendation, and then I'm shooting my 300 Win Mag or the likes of the 300 Norma or that sort of thing, and I'm going to be running up in the 3,000 feet per second, so a little bit above the sort of average speed. For the ELR stuff, I would tend to run a little bit slow. It's recommended for 1 in 9, I would tend to go 1 in 10. What I'm doing is actually, it's worked for me. I think it actually lets the bullet follow nose to tail a little bit more rather than holding yaw, which means that when it's fired off at a certain height, at a certain angle, it'll tend to hold that and come to target. If its stability is really, really strong, it'll tend to hold that. And I'm going with the logic that if I lose a little tiny bit of gyroscopic stability, which still makes it stable in flight, but I want it to flow to target nose to tail, so it actually leans over. How much that's true or not, I don't know, but that's my logic. The actual other logic that goes on here is it is in over rotation. So something that's running a small bullet like a 22-250 that's pushing a 60 grain round or a 70 grain round at 3,800 feet per second or 4,000 feet per second is they'll talk about a pop after the bullet has left the muzzle. Be it a metre out or be it 10 yards out, whatever, it'll be out where all of a sudden the bullet disintegrates because it's spinning that fast, it explodes. Now this is a real thing, this happens, and there's a couple of things going on, but it's actually because you have the soft metal inside the thin copper jacket. That soft metal with inertia spinning on it, it's spinning that quickly that soft metal starts to push out against that jacket. Once it causes deforming, because it's just spinning too fast to hold itself together, it will explode, it'll pop. It's distorted the jacket and it'll actually pop and they'll see them disappear. The problem would have happened already. The damage would have actually happened as it's coming out of the barrel, at the end of the barrel where it's got the most G's on it, the most friction on it, everything is pulling the hardest, and then it's just a matter of time as it travels through air before it actually pops right out, just the time of the skin tearing apart and things falling to pieces. The places where I've seen it in a 243, is where now a very long barrel with a lot of twist with a good amount of speed, and it would shoot and they were starting to just disappear. Some of the rounds weren't showing up. Shooting at 1,200 yards and every so often a round wouldn't show up, just wouldn't hit the ground out there. And what I deduced was happening was that because of the long barrel and the high speed and the long barrel and the twist and the speed all put together, is that the projectile was probably suffering a bit more temperature because it was starting to deform in the barrel, it was rubbing a bit harder, and it was actually changing the shape of the projectile. So it was giving us an inconsistent ballistic coefficient because some of them were deforming too much as they left the barrel. So I haven't seen it, you don't get to find the projectile after that, but what I did do in sort of way of proving it is simply shorten that barrel. It was a 31.5 inch barrel in a 243 running around the 3,100 feet per second. I shortened it back to a 26 inch barrel, ran the same rounds, and all of a sudden it shot consistently, actually gained some speed. So that also tells you that that barrel was starting to slow things down, but actually gained some speed from shortening the barrel, but then super consistent, super accurate, no damage done. It was just too long, and that extra length was causing issues. I've also heard people talk about, and I don't know properly what I'm talking about here, this is just a sensible logic to me, people talking about the likes of a 30 cal round, I think it was 30 cal, maybe it was 338, but something that was actually, they were talking about considering that the copper tips, the little hollow points, were actually deforming because they were picking up on Doppler radar that they were getting inconsistent BCs out of the fact they were going too quickly. Now I would consider that very unlikely. The copper tip is unlikely to bend. What is unlikely to change or deform? What I would consider is most likely to be happening is exactly the same thing. The jacket was starting to form because probably a very long barrel, very high speed, and was actually distortion in the jacket because of two things. A bit of the friction on the outside, but that lead is just, it's malleable and there's so much centrifugal force going on that started to cause deformations that then caused inconsistent, the shape of the bullet changed a little bit. The last bit I would go there in the opposite direction is actually using monolithic bullets, so solid bullets. Generally they're solid copper, solid brass, there's solid steel and all sorts of things, but the most things we're going to run into is the copper and the brass. And I tend to go the opposite way, or that's what my findings are saying. What I mean by the opposite way is I tend to go a little bit faster, tends to be right. If that round is suggested to have a minimum twist of 1 in 9, then I would tend to, I'm learning to go 1 under that, go 1 in 8. Simply through the fact that it's not going to deform to start off with. It's one of the problems actually with a solid bullet is it's not going to deform. It doesn't seal against the barrel quite as well, and there's things they do to get around that. But it's not going to change shape because it doesn't have that malleable center and a thin jacket. It's all solid in one piece. But the other thing it's missing is because it doesn't have that heavy, softer center. And the soft is not too much to do with it, but the heavy certainly is it doesn't have as much of an engine, doesn't have as much of a centrifugal drive in the core of it. So I don't think it's going to slow down any differently, but it tends to mean that then you can spin them a little bit faster and they tend to be obviously longer because for their weight anyway. That's the nature of what the monolithic bullet is, because it is lighter, it's less density, there's less weight per its size. So a little bit faster I've seen as no negative, and from what I've seen actually tends to help with accuracy, but certainly with the ELR stuff I'm more comfortable spinning a little bit faster. So I suppose that's the nutshell of this whole conversation is two things. One is, when you're considering a bullet for your barrel, or you want to shoot a bullet so you're picking a barrel, is consider the speed of the round. It isn't just what's written on the box, because that doesn't know how fast your round is. If you've got a very fast round, I would tend to slow it down. For a lead core sense, I would tend to slow down that twist a little bit, which means put a bigger number in it. But anyway, I tend to slow down the twist a little bit. And if you've got a very slow round, then you're going to need to run more twist. So if you're running a slow round, like I said, the 300 blackout, but there's lots of things down there. You know, no, I won't get into it. There's lots of slow rounds that you can run, and your twist needs to compensate for how slow it's going. There is calculators, you can work it out and that sort of stuff, but just something to consider. And a little bit the opposite when it comes to monolithic. When it comes to monolithic, then a little bit faster tends to help. Anyway, that's about what it is. I hope that wasn't too confusing. I hope it made some sense. It's just, like I said, the layman's look at barrel twist and how you really can sort of interact with it, with the particular projectile, round, cartridge, speed, all that sort of stuff, all relevant in the conversation. You know, guys, thanks for checking in. We'll catch you next time.